So your instructions told you to put it in standard form. So the first thing we would do is we would rewrite this one. Standard form would have looked like this: 3x squared plus 24x plus 36. Your first rule of factoring is to look for a common factor. There will be ones that we factor that look like this and you still have something in front, but we haven't gotten there yet. And so even when we get to that point, you want to look for a common factor first. And so when you look at this, you have 3, 24, and 36, and hopefully you would see that a 3 can come out of all of these numbers. And so your greatest common factor here is a 3, and you're left with x squared plus 8x plus 12. All right. And now that you have that, you have a trinomial that we have done factoring with. So now we're going to look at this last term here, 12. It is positive 12, which means that we have the same sign that's going to be going on in our binomials. And then we're going to look here and we notice that it's a plus there, so it's going to be plus plus. It's going to be two positives. So the 3 stays on the outside. And then we're going to set up our two binomials. We know it's going to be x plus for both of those. We just have to figure out what we're adding to both of those. So now we're going to say, what factors of 12 then add up to give me an 8? And if I list all of my factors of 12, I have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And I'm looking for something that adds to give me 8. Which 2 am I going to use? The 2 and the 6. And that is my answer.
You always start with a number at the end.
Standard form. 4x squared is going to stay where it is. Minus 44. Make sure that negative goes with your 44x. And then plus 96. And again, hopefully you can see that these do have something in common. What do they have in common?
4.
A 4. And so I'm going to take a 4 out of everything. That will stay on the outside. Yeah, and the negative stays there too. Yeah, so it's a negative 44, so we want to make it a negative 11. All right. Now for this one, once again, we're going to look at this last term. It's positive. So I have to have the same sign in my groups. In order to multiply and get positive, they have to be the same sign. And then I'm going to look at this middle one, and I can see that they're both going to be negative. They're both going to be negative. And so when I set this problem up, my 4 is going to stay here. I'm going to set up my two groups. And this time I'm going to write x minus for both of those. And then I'm going to look at all my factors of 24. And I'm going to say which of those add to give me 11. Which 2 do we choose? 3 and 8. And so this is my factored form here. And you can do a quick check. So you can say negative 3 times negative 8 equals 24. Negative 3 plus negative 8 equal 11, right? And so you can do a really quick check to see if I multiplied the 2 and if I added the 2, would I get the last one in the middle term? All right, let's look at this last one. Standard form. So for this, standard form is going to be the x to the 4th first, plus the 6x cubed, minus the 16x squared. Now between the numbers, I actually don't have anything I can take out, but in this one I can take out variables. What can I take out? I can take out an x squared. So I'm left with x squared plus 6x minus 16. And I changed, yes, there we go. All right, x squared plus 6x minus 16. All right. Now for this one, I am going to look again at this. I have a negative 16. The only way to multiply and get a negative number is to have one positive and one negative. All right. So I automatically know I'm going to have one positive and one negative. I will leave the x squared out here. I will go ahead and set up one positive and one negative. All right. And then I'm going to look at my factors of 16. So I have 1 and 16, 2 and 8, 4 and 4. I am trying to get a 6, but because 1 is positive and 1 is negative, you're going to end up subtracting those absolute values. So when one is positive and one is negative, when you add them, you're actually going to subtract the values of them, right? And so I'm looking at two numbers that subtract to give me a 6. So which of those subtract to give me a 6? Yeah, the 2 and the 8. Specifically, I need a positive 6. So if I were to say a negative 2 and a positive 8, that would give me a positive 6. But had I done this incorrectly, a positive 2 and a negative 8, while those would still multiply to give me a negative 16, they would add to give me a negative 6. And that's how I determine which one goes with the positive and which one goes with the negative. All right, so in this case, I want my 8 to go with my positive, and I want my 2 to go with my negative. And that is my factoring for this one. All right, so number 26 from homework looks like this. We are given 6b squared minus 42b plus 72. My first rule here is to look for a common factor between the 6, the 42, and the 72, and that's going to be 6. And so I'm going to take that out. B squared minus 7b plus 12. All right. Because it's positive 12, I need two factors that add to give me 7, and they're both going to be negative factors. So I'm going to say b minus here. Factors of 12 that add up to 7 are 3 and 4. Make sense? Okay. Anything else? All right, so you have a handout that's factor by grouping. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Repeat 16. 16 was a minus 15 plus 2. JC, did you have a question? No? All right, factor by grouping. I honestly don't know if your book teaches factor by grouping at all, to be completely honest. They use it the same way I use it to do it, but I don't see where they've given you any examples on just grouping. And so I am going to teach you factor by grouping first, and then we're going to move on to another type of factoring. So factor by grouping is a method that you actually use for polynomials that have 4 terms. Right? So this is a strategy for factor by grouping. You will notice that all of the polynomials on your sheet have 4 terms. So everything that we've done so far in this chapter has been a trinomial, pretty much. Well, the first chapter was just pulling out a common factor, but all of your factoring you did for homework and bell work were trinomials, okay? And so now we're going to look at factoring of larger polynomials, specifically 4-term polynomials. They give you the steps here. It will make more sense as we do it. But you separate the 2 terms into groups. So we're going to group the first 2 terms and we're going to group the last 2 terms. And then we're just going to do the standard process of looking for a common factor in one group at a time. And then we're going to do what we did at the very end, actually, of the first section. We should have common groups that we can take out. All right? And so then you'll see that we can factor this whole way by just kind of easy methods and using grouping to do it. All right, so let's look at the first example. I actually am going to look at number 1 together. So we have 30x cubed minus 40x squared plus 5x minus 8. I will tell you, even with grouping, your first step is to look for a common factor. Now, these particular ones don't have common factors. We will do some that do, but that is always your first step, to look for the common factor, okay? And so you would look at the 30, the 48, the 5, and the 8 and say, is there anything in common? You would come up with the answer of no, but you would still check, all right? Now that we've done that, we are going to group these. So we are legitimately going to put grouping symbols around the first 2 and then around the last 2, hence the term factor by grouping. So you are going to group the first 2 terms just like this. Then you're going to go behind this plus sign, and you are going to group the last 2 terms, and it should look something like that, okay? And then we are going to take these individually. We are going to look at this first group, and now we're going to say between the 30 and the 48, is there anything that these 2 numbers have in common? Do they have a common factor? What's your common factor between 48 and 30? So 6 can come out here. So we're going to take a 6 and we are going to put it out here between the variables. How many variables can I take out, if any? Yeah, I can take 2 x's out, correct? All right, so I can pull an x squared out. And then I'm going to divide it out. 30 divided by 6 gives me 5. I started with 3 x's. I pulled out 2 of them, so I have 1 left. I'm going to use this minus. Minus 48 divided by 6 gives me a what? I started with 2 x's. I pulled both of them out. I am done with that group. All right? Make sure you put this little plus sign before you start the next group. We're going to put a plus. All right? And then we're going to look at our next group. Between the 5 and the 8, do we have anything in common? No. But what about variables? So this guy's technically prime, correct? So with prime, the only thing they have in common is a what? A 1. When you are factoring by grouping, you need to write your 1. It is vitally important that you put a 1 there. All right? And when we pull this group out, I'll explain why. So the only thing they have in common is a 1, which means everything in the group stays exactly the same. 5x minus 8. All right? So this should look like the very last example of the first section that we did, right? We did these. They do have something in common now. What do they have in common?
5x.
The groups have the 5x minus 8 in common, don't they? So that's what we're going to take out. We're going to say, all right, they both have this in common. So we're going to take out the 5x minus 8. And then our second group is going to be what's left over. What's left over here? 6x squared. And then what's left over here? Plus 1. You must put the plus and the 1 there. Now, had we been able to take something out of the second group, we would have something other than 1 there. We would have plus whatever we could take out. This particular one was prime, okay? This is how I factored this 4 term. If I were to FOIL this, which we're going to check it, you will get what you started with, all right? So if I check this, to check it, you can FOIL it. All right, so I have 5x and 6x squared gives me 30x cubed. 5x and 1 gives me 5x. Negative 8 and positive 6 give me negative 48x squared. And then negative 8 and positive 1 gives me negative 8. When I put that in standard form, I get 30x cubed minus 48x squared plus 5x minus 8, which is exactly what I started with. All right? So I want you to try number 2. Try number 2. So the difference here when I group this is that I am going to be grouping behind a negative sign instead of a positive, okay? And so when I do this, I have to think about what happens if I were to distribute that negative back through. So before I ever group, I have a negative 4x and a plus 3 at the end. Everybody see that? So if I throw these groups in here, this tells me that I would distribute a negative, correct? If I distribute a negative, I will get that negative 4x, which is exactly what I need, but I would get a negative 3, which is a problem. And so when you group behind a negative, you have to account for it, that you have taken it out of that group. The 4x is fine. It's going to stay 4x because distributing it through would mean it is a negative 4x, and indeed it is. But the very last number, you need to change the sign. Whatever it is, you need to do the opposite, because by grouping it, you've technically taken a negative out of that group. So we need to change this positive 3 to a negative 3, just like that. Anytime you group behind a negative, your last term changes signs. Whatever it is, it changes signs. All right? So it doesn't affect anything if you group behind a positive. Everything stays exactly the way it is. But if you group behind a negative, the very last number needs to change signs. Okay? Once you do that, you do it exactly the same as what we just did. Between 12 and 9, what do I have in common? A 3. Between x cubed and x squared, what do I have in common? X squared. 12 divided by 3 is 4. X cubed divided by x squared is x. 9 divided by 3 is 3. And I took out both of my x squareds. I am going to put a minus here because that's what I have. And then this group, what do you know about that group between 4x and 3? It's prime, so we're going to pull a 1 out. So we're going to put a 1 here. And then we have 4x, and this is minus 3. Plus a negative is just minus 3. You can see that had I not done that, my groups would not be the same, right? Had I not done that, I would have 1 4x minus 3 and 1 4x plus 3. Okay? So now that I have this, I can see the 4x minus 3 is in common. What I have left over is 3x squared minus 1. And that is my factoring. So go ahead and try number 6. All right. So same thing here. I have 4 terms. Group the first 2, group the last 2. So I'm going to group these 2, group the last 2. I grouped behind a positive, so nothing needs to change in my second group. Between the numbers 2 and 2, 2 can come out. Can any x's come out?
2.
Yeah, 2 x's can come out. What about y's? 2 y's can come out. So I have 2 divided by 2, which is 1. I took all my y's out. I started with 3 x's and I took 2 out. So in the first set here, I just have 1 x left. Minus, I took out 2 divided by 2, which is 1. I started with 2 x's. I took 2 out, so there's no x's left. I started with 2 y's. I took 2 out. There's no y's left. So I'm done with that group. Plus, between the 3 and the 3, a 3 can come out. Can any x's come out? No. What about z's? Yes, one of your z's can come out. 3 divided by 3 was 1. I took out the z, so I'm left with just the x. 3 divided by 3 is a 1, and I also took out that z. So all I have left is the 1. You'll notice when I have 1 with a variable that I'm not writing the 1, but if I have 1 by itself, I'm writing the 1. All right? So if you have a variable, the 1 is understood and you don't need it. But if you don't have a variable, the 1 is not understood. There is a difference between x and x minus 1, right? So if 1 is the only thing left, you must write it, all right? You must write it because I can plug in any number that I want to, and those will be different answers between x and x minus 1. Those are 2 different things, all right? Between these, I have the x minus 1 in common, And I'm left with the 2x squared y squared plus the 3z. And that is my factoring. Go ahead and try number 12.